Well, all three maritime provincial governments are running deficits in the hundreds of millions of dollars. How can they get their finances in order? Former New Brunswick Premier Shawn Graham certainly knows about dealing with deficit. He faced them during his term and the tough decisions that politicians make. And we've reached him in Singapore, where it's, what, like the middle of the morning or something?
There is a 12 hours difference, so yeah, it is the middle of the morning here, Tom.
Well, we certainly appreciate you getting up or staying up to be with us. You're in Asia, trade talks. Why don't you tell us a bit about why you're there?
Yes, well, I'm here for the Canada-Asia-Pacific Foundation annual general meeting, and there's a huge symposium today that's going to be held on trade with Asia. The federal ministers here, a number of key ambassadors from the region are here as well, and a number of business and academic leaders looking at ways to diversify trade into Asia for Canada, which is critical right now as we try to uncouple from that huge supply chain to the south of us.
Right. So given the uncertainty in trade, how does that factor into provincial budgets, into how premiers and cabinets look at spending going forward?
Well, today, unfortunately, governments in Atlantic Canada and across the country are facing massive deficit situations because of the current economic climate. I'll give some historical context. 20 years ago, our government was running balanced budgets until the global economic recession hit in 2009, which had a huge impact, not just on our budget, but across the country. And at the time, we turned actually to the governor of the Bank of Canada, Mark Carney, who is our current prime minister, and we followed the lead of the government of Stephen Harper, and we had to move to deficit spending to help stimulate the economy, to bring us through that recessionary period. And following our government, the government of David Alward, unfortunately stayed in deficit positions following the balanced budgets that we were under. And it was only then under the government of Brian Gallant that they were able to return to balanced budgets. And that was due not to decisions that the government of the day made in cutting, but it was made by growing the economic pie. There was increased transfers from the federal government that allowed the government of Brian Gallant to move to a surplus situation. And then the government of Blaine Higgs, as we know, was able to grow huge surpluses. And that was due to, again, population growth, more people coming into New Brunswick, which allowed a bigger piece of an economic pie to pay for services. And then today we see the government of Susan Holt, which had campaigned on balanced budgets, actually having huge deficits. And those deficits have been attributed to the slowdown in the economy. So to give an historical context, 20 years ago, our budget was approximately $7 billion, and the current budget that the whole government's going to be bringing forward is going to be over $14 billion. So but we haven't doubled the size of our infrastructure during that period. What's occurred is the growth of the civil service and the cost of maintaining that civil service within New Brunswick. That is a huge amount of the cost that the government has to make decisions around today on attempting to move back to a balanced situation.
So Premier Holt has said she would like to hear from New Brunswickers as to what they might suggest the province can do to help alleviate some of that burden of the deficit. Premier Houston has cut taxes. It's unlikely he'd be willing to increase them again. We're hearing from nervous public sector unions. Really, what are the options?
Well, the options are very limited. As I said, in 20 years, we've doubled the size of the budget in the province. But at the same time, we have not doubled the amount of revenue coming into cost, to cover those services. That's why we're in a deficit situation today. In 2008, our government made the difficult decision to freeze wages we were the first jurisdiction in Canada, actually, to put in a wage freeze of 0 and 0 over a 2-year period. And we honored the collective agreements, but it also meant that going forward, all new contracts signed would have a 0 and 0. And that was built into, if you're an economist or a financial planner, that's built into the base. So that means every year going forward, you don't have to pay that salary increase. So it did give some budget cushion for successive governments coming after us to give them some budget flexibility. This current government doesn't have that. So they're either going to have to cut services, and that's difficult, or they're going to have to reduce the wages that are being paid or the amount of people collecting those wages within the civil service.
What's the risk of doing nothing?
Well, we can't do nothing. And the government has to make the change that's needed in the second year of their mandate. They campaigned on balanced budgets, and they have to, show to New Brunswickers that they're making an attempt, a very sizable attempt, to move in that direction. So, there is going to be some difficult decisions. I remember, when we made cuts under our budget, we had to freeze salaries, but we also had to cut services. And if you recall, we tried to cut the ferry services that were being offered under the Department of Transportation, and everyone was up in arms at that time across New Brunswick. And then the Alberta government came in and actually restored those services, but it didn't fix the problem. So there has to be today, some very significant changes made on how government delivers services. And if I was the Premier, I'd want a whole bunch of people upset at me across the province, showing that these tough decisions are impacting everyone, not just a select group. But then New Brunswickers will also understand at the same time that, yes, we have to live within our means, and that's why the government is making these difficult decisions.
And you can probably apply all of what you've said to New Brunswick, or to Prince Edward Island and to Nova Scotia as well.
Exactly. Yeah. No. The region sadly is being impacted by the tariffs. 2008, we had a dollar that was at par, which was even more difficult for our government because we lost that 30% adjustment on our exports. Today, the tariffs are impacting, our sale of goods into the U.S., but the exchange rate is cushioning that. So it comes down to now, either we grow the revenue, which the government, can't do overnight. You can't bring in $1 billion in new revenue.
Yeah.
So in Atlantic Canada, the governments have used some raising taxes. I don't think is going to be an option because we are overtaxed in our region. So it is going to impact on the delivery of services and how we cost effectively deliver those services. Okay,
well, you've given us lots to think about. Shawn Graham, thank you for your perspective and for staying up late or getting up early, depending how you look at it. We'll talk to you when you get home.
Cheers.
We'll take a time out. We'll be right back.